I heard something I was never meant to hear. I remember standing in the hallway holding a grocery bag that was cutting into my wrist. The receipt I'd tucked inside fluttered with the air from the vent, almost like it wanted to warn me before the words reached my ears. From the kitchen, I heard my son's voice, calm, casual, familiar, in the way comfort can sometimes hide cruelty. Just dump all 9 kids on her. She doesn't do anything anyway. He laughed. Then Jessica. My daughter-in-law gave that soft, polite chuckle women use when they agree, but don't want to sound too eager. I froze. My chest went tight like I'd swallowed ice. It's strange how fast a lifetime of love can turn into silence. I stood there, invisible in my own family's home, realizing the groceries I'd brought, the catering bill I'd already paid, the effort I'd made to make this Christmas perfect, all of it meant nothing. I'd walked through the side door like I always did. No knocking, no warning, because I never wanted to be a burden. I thought I was helping, as mothers do. But that one careless sentence stripped away every illusion. They didn't see me as family anymore. I was convenience, a free babysitter, a quiet servant wrapped in good intentions. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. The house I'd once filled with laughter felt like someone else's now. And as their voices carried on light and easy, I slipped back out the same door I came through. I didn't say a word. I just left. Out in the car, the cold leather pressed against my back. I sat there, hands still gripping the grocery bag, unable to move. Not because I didn't know where to go, but because for the first time in my life, I didn't know where I belonged. On the drive home that night, the city lights blurred through my windshield like smeared paint. I couldn't stop thinking about those words echoing in my head. I kept asking myself when exactly I became the person everyone could just depend on, without ever asking if I wanted to. The truth is, it didn't happen overnight. It happened in small ways. Little favors that grew into expectations. Every time I said, sure, I'll help, a tiny part of me faded into the background. I remembered the years of birthdays where I baked 3 cakes because someone didn't like frosting. The Thanksgivings when I cooked all day, stayed late to clean, and still ended up sleeping on the basement pull-out sofa because the real guests got the bedrooms. There was never a pillow, sometimes not even a sheet. Jessica would smile and say, "Oh, shoot, we forgot to set you up better," then disappear upstairs. Mother's Days came and went with no call, no card, not even a lazy text. I told myself they were busy, that time zones made it hard. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. They'd simply stopped seeing me. I remembered their wedding day. I ironed Mark's shirt, tied ribbons on centerpieces, even mopped up spilled wine before the photos were taken. Later, when I looked through the pictures online, I wasn't in a single one. Not behind the cake, not in the family portraits. When I asked, Mark said, "You must have stepped out." But I knew where I was. I'd been cleaning up after them again. For years, I kept believing next time would be different. Each time they promised I could rest, I let myself believe it. When Mark told me after Thanksgiving, "Mum, you've done enough, we'll handle Christmas," I almost cried from relief. I thought maybe he finally saw me. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the year I'd sit at the table instead of serving it. So I prepaid for the catering, thinking it would make things easier for them, a quiet gift from me to the family. I didn't tell anyone. I wanted Christmas to feel simple, peaceful together. But together was never really the point. For them, was it? It was about convenience, mine. I used to think love meant saying yes no matter how tired I was. But somewhere along the line, I stopped realizing that every yes I gave meant another no to myself. I became the one who showed up, fixed everything, filled the gaps no one else wanted to fill. I wasn't Linda the mum anymore. I was the default setting, the one who always says yes. And that's the kind of exhaustion that doesn't show on your face. It lives in your bones. It's the kind that makes you forget who you were before people decided what you're useful for. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about every time I'd mistaken being needed for being loved. Maybe that's how mothers disappear, not all at once, but piece by piece, every time they agree to something they shouldn't have to. What have I given? And what have I received? The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold and a notebook I hadn't touched in years. The house was silent, the kind of silence that feels too heavy for its own walls. I didn't know where to start, so I drew a line down the middle of the page. On one side, I wrote given. On the other, received. The given column filled quickly rides to school, babysitting weekends, cooking, cleaning, paying for things I was never asked about, but always expected to cover. Birthdays, holidays, last-minute favors, emotional support on demand. Every yes that felt like love at the time. The pen barely paused. Then I looked at the other column. Received. It stayed empty. At first I laughed a little, thinking maybe I'd remember something soon. But the longer I stared, the more I realized there wasn't much to write. The things I'd gotten in return weren't kindness or care. They were assumptions. They assumed I'd do it. They assumed I'd show up. They assumed I'd pay, forgive, fix, repeat. I turned the page and started overdrawing 2 new columns. This time, what they think I want and what I actually want. On the left, I wrote what I knew they believed about me. They think I don't mind babysitting. They think I don't need rest. They think I enjoy being the reliable one. They think I'll pay because I can. Then on the right, I wrote what I'd never said out loud. I want to be invited, not assigned. I want to enjoy, not host. I want to sit at the table, not serve it. I want to be seen as a person, not a resource. Reading those words back felt strange at first, like hearing my own voice for the first time in years. I'd spent so long saying yes that I'd forgotten how to say what I actually wanted. Somewhere along the way, I learned that a good mother doesn't have needs. She only gives. But that version of love had started to feel like erasure. I realized how easy it is to lose yourself in the noise of family duty. You convince yourself that sacrificing your time is the same as being loved. You tell yourself they'll notice someday that gratitude will come later, but later never shows up. And the more you wait, the smaller you become. That morning, I stopped waiting. I looked at the list again. It wasn't just ink on paper. It was proof of how far I'd drifted from the woman I once was. The woman who used to laugh loudly, who loved painting, who took long drives with no destination. The woman who didn't apologize for wanting rest. As the sun came through the window, I caught sight of a note I'd scribbled months ago. A name Martha next to a phone number. She'd called back in September, inviting me to spend Christmas at her ranch in New Mexico. I'd written a quick reply underneath can't. Family comes first. Family comes first. The phrase stung now. I had lived by it like a rule carved in stone. But what happens when family stops, including you in the picture? When first never means you? I ran my fingers over that line until the ink smudged slightly. Then I flipped the notebook closed. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment everything shifted. I had spent years being dependable for everyone else. It was time to start being dependable for myself. I cancelled Christmas and chose myself instead. I called the catering company the next morning. The woman on the line recognized my name before I finished spelling it. Her tone was gentle, cautious, as if she already sensed something had shifted. I told her I needed to cancel the entire order. There was a pause. The sound of typing, then she said a partial refund could be processed. I thanked her and hung up before she could say more. For a long time, I just sat there at the kitchen table, staring at the phone like it might judge me. My heart was racing, but it wasn't fear. It was release. For years, I'd been trapped in an endless loop of duty. That small act of cancelling dinner felt like cutting the first thread that had held me bound. I folded a piece of paper and wrote one line to myself. No one else gets to decide what I'm worth. I sealed it in an envelope, addressed it to my own name, and dropped it in the mailbox. It sounds silly, but writing it down made it real, like I was signing a quiet contract with my future self. Then I packed a suitcase. Not the big one I used for family trips or emergencies, just the small one that fit a sweater, jeans, and my old travel mug. I didn't need much, just space. I turned off my phone, slipped the charger into a drawer, and let the silence settle in. When I finally stepped outside, the air was cold and clean. The highway stretched out ahead of me like an open invitation. I didn't play music. I didn't call anyone. I just drove. Mile after mile, the noise in my head started to fade. For the first time in years, I wasn't running from something. I was driving toward peace. It wasn't an escape. It was permission. Somewhere between Tucson and Las Cruces, the sunrise painted the desert gold. I could almost feel the weight lifting from my shoulders. Every mile was a boundary I was reclaiming. Every breath felt new. That morning, I realized freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It looks like a woman closing the door quietly behind her, choosing not to explain, not to argue, not to wait for understanding that will never come. I didn't cancel Christmas out of anger. I cancelled it to remember myself, to prove that love doesn't have to mean exhaustion. And as the miles rolled by, I promised myself this would be the last time I'd ever mistake being needed for being valued. I used to serve the table. Now I finally sit at it. By the time I reached Martha's ranch in New Mexico, the world felt quiet in a way I hadn't known in years. The air smelled of cedar and dust, the kind that stays on your skin and reminds you that you're still alive. Martha met me on the porch with her usual grin. No questions, no judgment. Just a warm hug that said, "You're safe here." Her place wasn't fancy. It was real. A little house with chipped paint. A kitchen that always smelled like coffee and cinnamon. And a view that stretched wider than my regrets. That first night we sat by the fire with mugs of tea. No small talk, no guilt. Just two women who had survived their share of unspoken burdens. The next morning I woke up to sunlight spilling across the room, not to alarms or phone calls. There were no kids shouting, no lists waiting, no invisible expectations pressing on my chest. Martha handed me a cup of coffee and said, "Sit. Rest." That's it. I didn't know rest could feel so full. Christmas Eve came softly. Neighbours drifted in, carrying homemade bread and laughter instead of obligations. Someone turned on an old radio, its static blending with the sound of conversation. There was no performance here, no matching pajamas, no photo-perfect chaos, just people sharing space because they wanted to. When we set the long wooden table outside, Martha pointed to the chair at the end. "That one's yours." It took me a second to understand what she meant. No one had ever saved me a seat before, not one that wasn't tied to work. For once, I wasn't pouring wine, checking the oven, or cleaning up behind others. I was just Linda, sitting among friends, and it was enough. We talked about small things, the year the turkey exploded in someone's oven, a cat that kept stealing cookies, and the time Martha accidentally dyed her hair green. The stories were simple, but they filled the space with something I hadn't felt in years, belonging without condition. As the sun dipped low, I realized how much I had missed the sound of my own laughter. It wasn't the polite laugh I used to offer to keep the peace. It was deeper, lighter, honest. That night, as the stars spread across the desert sky, I understood something I'd never said out loud. Christmas doesn't have to be grand or loud or perfect. Sometimes it's just peace, a chair that's waiting for you, and the freedom to finally sit down. For the first time in decades, I wasn't hosting Christmas. I was living it. I'm not your maid. I'm your mother. It was a cold morning when they came. I heard the sharp knock before I even reached the door. 3 figures stood on the porch. Mark, Jessica, and my daughter-in-law Clara, each carrying the kind of tension that fills a room before words do. They didn't wait to be invited in. Jessica spoke first, her tone clipped. "You embarrassed us." Mark's jaw tightened. The food never showed up. People were asking questions. Clara added, "You ruined Christmas." I didn't flinch. I let their words hang in the air like smoke that refused to clear. For years I had absorbed these storms, softening my voice, lowering my eyes, apologizing for things I didn't do. But not this time. I rested my hands on the counter and said quietly, "I didn't ruin anything. I simply stepped out of a role I never agreed to play." Mark frowned as if he couldn't process the sentence. "What does that even mean?" "It means I'm not your staff. I'm not the free babysitter, the invisible cook, the one who fixes everything while everyone else celebrates. I'm your mother, not your employee." The silence that followed was thick, unfamiliar. Jessica looked ready to argue. Clara crossed her arms, waiting for me to back down. But I stayed still, calm, steady, unshaken. "You know, I said for a long time I believed being a good mum meant doing everything without question. I thought love was measured by sacrifice. But love isn't slavery. It's not an endless to-do list." I looked at Mark. Really looked at him. The boy who used to run to me when he was scared. Now a man who saw me as convenience. His eyes dropped. Maybe for the first time he realized I wasn't coming back to that old version of me. "If you came here for an apology, you won't get one," I said softly. "I didn't close the door to punish you. I closed it to protect myself." No one moved. The only sound was the wind scraping against the porch railing. Eventually they turned and left slower than they'd arrived, like people walking away from a truth they didn't want to face. I closed the door gently and locked it. Not out of anger, but closure. That was the moment I knew something fundamental had changed. I wasn't the woman who filled silence with explanations anymore. I didn't need to justify peace. For years, I believed I owed everyone understanding. But that morning taught me something else. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for them is to finally say no and mean it. I don't need to be needed to exist. The months that followed moved quietly like a soft breeze through an open window. January came and went without cards or calls, and for the first time that silence didn't sting. It felt like space-wide calm, and mine. Most Saturdays I walked to the small public library near my house. There's a reading nook by the southwest window that catches the best afternoon light. I'd bring a thermos of coffee and a new book, sometimes finishing it, sometimes just letting my thoughts wander between the words. No interruptions, no phone buzzing, just stillness that didn't demand anything from me. On Thursdays, I started volunteering at a local clinic. Nothing heavy, just greeting people at the front desk, handing out clipboards, smiling at strangers who didn't expect me to fix their lives. It was simple, kind work. It reminded me that being useful could feel light, not draining. I didn't block Mark's number. He called twice in January, late quiet calls that went unanswered. I didn't delete them either. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't trying to prove a point. I just didn't feel the pull to pick up. For years, I'd been addicted to being needed. It gave me a sense of purpose I confused with love. But now I'm learning something new. Peace doesn't come from being indispensable. It comes from being whole, even when no one's asking for you. The house is smaller now and quieter, but it's filled with little things that belong only to me. A vase of daisies that never last long, paintings I never finished, coffee cups with lipstick stains that no one scolds me for leaving out. These are the details of a life that's mine again. Sometimes I still catch myself reaching for the phone, half expecting a crisis or a favor. But most days I just smile, take another sip of coffee, and let the thought pass. Silence used to terrify me. It felt like rejection. Now it feels like breathing, like finally having a room in my own story that no one else can walk into uninvited. I've stopped waiting for apologies that will never come, and stopped chasing moments that don't belong to me. I cook when I want to. I rest when I need to. I say no without guilt, and yes only when I mean it. For a long time, I lived as though I owed the world proof of my worth. But sitting here now, with sunlight spilling across the floor, I finally understand I don't owe anyone my exhaustion. I don't have to be needed to have value. This life, quiet, ordinary, imperfect, is mine, not borrowed, not expected, just mine.